welcome. I'm Dr. Mike Rademacher, prescription for your transformation, real people, real conversations, and real success. And it's interesting how we actually do relate with that. And it's that communication that we share with others that really creates either a situation of success or something quite the opposite. And so the challenge that we have when it comes down to communication is, are we actually fully aware of what that communication really is? And an interesting question that I pose to many people is, who's actually responsible for that? And there's this beautiful sort of focus, if you will, and that feedback is the communication that you give. Said differently, the response that you get from the person that you're communicating to is really whatever it is that you communicated to them. So if you're not liking the response, if the response doesn't seem in alignment to whatever it is that you thought you were communicating to that other person, then obviously it's your responsibility to communicate in a different way, unless you just don't care and just go along. And that is what happens way too often. Too many people just simply don't care, are not mindful enough of how it is that we really truly communicate with others. And so for today, it's very, very exciting because we are all going to learn some brilliant stuff from a brilliant woman who really understands language in the most fundamental way. And she's got an incredibly long history, incredibly long career in so many different parts of life that in my mind, she's the perfect and legitimate person to be talking about language. And so I want to welcome today Dr. Janet Smith Warfield. And is it Warfield? I forget.
Warfield. Like Battlefield.
Yeah, Warfield. There you go. And I'm a little spastic today because at the last minute I realized that a whole bunch of things had to be done, and now I'm all flustered. And of course, the amazing Sedona once again. And what's great about this, and we're going to do things a little differently today. And Janet, just let me know when you see the image. But we're going to start off with an image. And we were talking before the show really about perspective. And what is it? What is the perspective that we have? And what is it that we actually look at? What is it that we perceive? And so I'm going to show an image. And I've already seen this image, so it's not really fair, but Sedona has not. And so I'm going to put this image up, and then I'll let Janet ask the right kind of questions. It's going to take a moment.
And I do see it now, Bart. And first of all, I need to give credit for this image to a friend of mine, John Langdon, who is a wonderful graphic designer, plays with words all the time, but in a different way from the way I play with words. He created this in 1999, and right now I'm not going to tell you what it's called because I think it would be fun to play with this image a little bit first. So,
excellent.
Sedona, what do you see here?
In the writing, I read note and love.
Okay, interesting. And if you aren't looking at the writing, what else do you see? Anything?
I feel like I'm taking a Rorschach test.
It is like a Rorschach test.
Not really. I see like a couple different colors, and it looks like there is no, I don't see a whole lot else behind the words. I can see like it kind of looks like it was finger painted like in the back, the different like strokes on it, and it kind of looks like, well, to be fair, I don't have my glasses, but
which also makes a difference in terms of what you can see.
It looks like it might be like under the E, it kind of looks like there might be a little animal there in black. I don't know. That might not be true.
Okay.
And so for any of the radio listeners, there's this picture with letters on it, and there's a lot of different ways to be looking at it. And I'm not going to give it away, but once Dr. Janet allows us to explain to listeners what's out there, we will.
Sedona, if you look just at the black marks on that paper, what do you see?
In the writing or around it?
Whichever way you'd like to look at it. Let's start with the writing.
The edges of the black lettering is sharper, and the contrast color, the pink, is curved and softer.
You know what this means, Dr. Janet, is that she chooses to see her world in a certain way, not the black way.
That I see that. I'm trying to get her to see it in the black way.
She's seeing things pink, but she's not seeing them black.
And if you're looking at the light pink letters, that's where you see love, correct?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
So could the word note spell something different? Be a different word?
Oh, wait, could be hate.
What? Could be what?
It could be hate.
Yes.
That's actually yeah. that is the first thing that a lot of people see in this image.
Wow, really?
Yes.
Yep, definitely was not the first one that I picked up on.
I get that. It took a long time to get you there. Could you put that back up again for a minute, Bart?
Sure.
While we're talking about it, I've got some more questions to ask.
Is it up?
Yes, it is. So, Sedona, when you see the word love, how do you feel? Do you have any emotions connected with that?
Bubbly.
Bubbly, okay. Anything else?
Not really. I don't know that, like, the way it's written in the black, if that's, I like that it's all connected in the pink. In the black it's broken up, but in the pink it's all connected.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay. And you originally saw the word note in there too at the beginning. It was love and note that you saw. Do you have any emotions connected with that word note? Anything, any feelings that you have around that word?
I'm a writer, so that might have been part of it.
Mm.
Okay. Yeah. This is even more interesting when you have a half a dozen people or more all looking at this image. And if you see the word hate, do you have any feelings in connection with that word?
Not a whole lot. Not really.
Okay, and I can tell you a lot of people when they see the word hate, they'll recoil almost. They'll go, when they see that word hate. And a lot of people feel unsafe. They feel sort of compressed or contracted when they see the word hate. And a lot of people, when they see the word love, they feel expanded, they feel safe, they feel warm, they feel secure. So it's just interesting, a lot of things that people see here. I've had people tell me they see flowers and snakes and all sorts of things in here. But the interesting thing to notice about this image by John Langdon, is that nothing on the paper changes. Nothing in front of us changes. But then look what our minds do with what we perceive. And with a lot of people, just notice how what they perceive affects how they feel and maybe even how they would act. For example, if they see the word hate and they feel very contracted and unsafe, they might be a lot less likely to express themselves, go outside, enjoy a beautiful day. So what you see, what your mind does with what's in that image affects everything in your whole life.
And also, mind you, looking at it, from the opposite angle, starting off, whatever emotion you're feeling in a very moment is also the lens or the filter by which you see the world around you. So it goes both ways. It's really interesting. And then what kind of connects it all is specifically, and that's a topic for today, is language. What does that then do, to our thinking, to our emotions, to our physiology, to how we, show up in the world around us. And so I want to ask Dr. Janet, to expand more on how we use language and how it can save us and how it can get us into trouble.
Sometimes it can do both at the same time. Language chops up our experience. We've got this influx of sensory data coming in at us all the time. And from the time we're old enough to listen to our parents, we're taught particular words go with particular objects out there. So we're taught to separate mommy from daddy, for example. Mommy is one person, daddy is another person, Billy is a brother, Susie is a sister. We're taught what a tree is, we're taught what a book is, we're taught what a flower is. So we have all these very fixed ideas of what we see and what we're expected to see by our parents. And even depending on our rearing, we may see things differently because some of our experiences have been painful and some of our experiences have been happy and joyful. So we shape the experiences always in terms partly of what we've been taught, but also partly in terms of our own feelings. If we've been through a very painful experience, we're going to shape it differently from the way we shape an experience which is joyful or pleasant. There's a semanticist. He's deceased now. His name was Alfred Krzyzewski, and has a very famous saying, "The map is not the territory." And I like to elaborate on that a little bit and say that the words are not the experience. The words are maps of our experience. So it's very easy for us to fight over which map is right and which map is wrong, but we may both be talking about the same underlying experience. We're just framing it differently conceptually with our words and our past experiences and what we've been taught and the culture we grew up with and the amount of education we have. There are all sorts of influences there that are going to affect the way we experience anything that happens. And what's interesting is that we all do this differently. Each one of us is unique in the way we perceive our world, even when we're all looking at the same thing as we were a little while ago. So I don't know. Where do you want to go from here, Bart?
I'd like to add to that again, and this is a term that I learned from Tony Robbins. And where you put your focus, that's where your energy goes. So where focus goes, energy goes. And so yes, we could be looking at the same thing. And as we looked at this picture, some people will focus on the black right away. Some people will focus on the pink, and obviously then immediately their experience is different. So not only the language that they get to use, but also the focus, and also finally, the meaning. And what's interesting is that we have the opportunity, because we are in charge of our own brain, so therefore our thoughts, so therefore our actions, and so therefore, whatever it is that we focus on, and the meaning that we choose to give anything. And what I found really quite fascinating, because this is a perspective that I hadn't quite appreciated before talking to Dr. Janet, to be more specific, is how divisive words are. Now, there's one word I just learned just now that isn't divisive, and that's the word whoosh. But words are divisive. And so I like you to talk about that, because my guess, and as much training and teaching and learnings I have had, I never, perceived words in that context.
Well, for example, there are a lot of obvious examples of words that divide. Words divide and categorize. That's what our minds do, and they do it so that we can understand this influx of sensory data that's coming in at us all the time, and we can protect ourselves as well as possible and chart our course and live the kind of life we want to live. But you take the word high, low, good, bad, right, wrong, knowledge, ignorance. These all appear to be opposites, but they aren't necessarily opposite. For example, let's take tall and short, for example. Is a man who's 5 feet 9 inches tall or short?
Right.
May depend on who he's standing next to.
Right.
Well, if he's standing next to a 6'6" inch tall man, or is he standing next to a midget? Depending on the relationship, he could be either tall or short. So there's no definitive description you can give for that man. You can't say he's tall, you can't say he's short, except in comparison to something else. And going back to that original image that you had on the screen, if you had one person looking at that image and they were sure that they saw hate, and then you had another person looking at that image and they were sure that they saw love, they could very well get into a battle over the words. And they're both really sure they're right. But then neither one of them sees the other perspective. And so you've got a fight over the words when the underlying image is what it is. There's no fight there. It's the words that create the battles. And it's because we aren't aware of the way we perceive and the depth of meaning. And of course, all this is very theoretical. I think if we choose, here you get into intention, if we choose to work together and see if we can find an alignment in our communication and our goals, we work differently than if our intention is to beat the other guy down or be the winner in a competition. You get into all kinds of power issues here too. It gets quite complex, actually, and I know we're trying to keep this simple, but I think a lot of the point is to simply be aware that the way you see the world is not necessarily the way everybody else sees the world. And there are ways of communicating with one another so that at least you understand how somebody else can see the world and why they see it differently from you. And it's interesting because once you can see through another person's eyes, you can move into compassion. It doesn't mean that you agree with them, doesn't mean that you like their conduct, but you can at least understand how they're seeing the world and maybe why they need to see it that world. the world
So I
that
have
way.
I have a question, and it's an interesting question, and I hope you have a great answer. Because the meaning of a word seems to be evolving with time. And so if when you talked earlier on, the picture doesn't change, the word doesn't change, but the meaning of the word has been changing. And just so I pre-frame this and contextualize this platform is really about having honest conversations, being respectful, being objective, getting the data points so that you can make your own choice. There's no specific agenda, particularly political or religious. And the reason I say that is because in this world, which just absolutely drives me nuts in this country right now, is all this political correctness, all this proper speech. I mean, it's absolutely nonsense, really, to worry so much about these words that have evolved over time. Now, suddenly, words that have been perfectly acceptable in current lingo now suddenly become swear words, and so or bad words or demeaning words. I mean, now it's sort of like you can't call somebody Hispanic or Latino or whatever, even midget. So my question for you, Dr. Janet, is simply this: is that where does all this angst come from? That one day a word is perfectly neutral and just descriptive without emotion, now suddenly becomes a word of demeaning.
I think demeaning words are frequently used by people who have very low self-esteem. It's the only way they can feel important. You may remember the story I told in New Zealand of when I was a teenager and I overheard a classmate call me queer. It was just, I was minding my own business, and that one word was just like an arrow piercing my heart. And it stayed there for years, and suddenly I felt not good enough. I felt less than. And I learned only years later that the classmate who called me queer was the daughter of an alcoholic who abused his wife and his children. And it was the only way she could feel important was to abuse other people or call other people names. And it's sad, but just being aware of that is really helpful because she wasn't saying anything about who I was. She was speaking words that maybe she needed to speak to feel okay herself because
Right.
she didn't feel okay.
Yeah, and that's so true because the best way for someone to feel more or better about themselves is by putting somebody down. I totally agree with that. But what I'm also looking specifically is how a word that starts off being just neutral without any kind of demeaning intent over time becomes a demeaning word. And so it's almost like the word Latino. I don't know if it's a demeaning word for some people today or not, whether you can use that word. But at one point it's neutral, and now it's a bad word. It's a word we can't use anymore. How does that happen? What are your thoughts as to what is that evolution? I mean, my only guess is that enough people start using that in a negative way that it now becomes negative. But me coming from Europe, and I'm going to be totally transparent, I don't see, I personally don't see something wrong by calling somebody black. I mean, I'm white, they're black. Chinese, well, they might be yellow. I don't know, and I don't see the issue with that. But it's such a big issue in this country. Now I'm kind of fumbling over my words. What do I call these people? Okay, if I have to change the way that I call them, well, maybe I should think about them calling me something different. I mean, but that's just an example, and there's so many words out there that just have evolved over time to now be a word that cannot be used.
Well, I think you hit on it earlier when you said when people use words in kind of a derogatory way, like that Latino, as if he's a criminal or he's no good or he's stupid or something like that. It's that kind of connotation that ultimately the person of Hispanic origin is going to feel disrespected and abused when the word is directed at them with a lot of negative emotion around it, or put down emotion, or power over emotion, so that it turns then into a word of disrespect. And the person who could be categorized that way. And you see, this is part of the problem. We categorize one another. And it's probably really, really, I'm at a loss for words. I'll say it's really harmful in a respect when we do this, because when we categorize people, we treat them like objects rather than connecting directly to them as human beings.
Yeah, when we are judgmental, number one, we lose the ability to see their greatness. But then when we generalize that, that makes it even worse. And that is, cheating yourself and the other person from really having a real experience versus one that's contrived and not true and offensive and everything else. And I guess our brain wants to seek meaning in everything that's around us. And as you mentioned, and in one of your papers discussed the fact that the left brain is that area that collects the data points and categorizes them, give it a specific meaning, and then you switch it over to the right brain to give it the emotion, and then I guess the emotion then drives the bus and says, well, I'm being offensive now.
Or perhaps the other person is just seeing me as offensive, even then, though I have no intention of offending them. I am seeing a word as being neutral, as having no emotional content. But for someone who has been called that word in another situation where perhaps it's been coupled with abuse or unfair treatment or prejudice or something else, they're going to have a whole different emotional context and experiential context around that word. So your word spoken in neutrality is going to hit them like a ton of bricks because of their own background. And you may not even know that until they react. Go ahead.
No, you go ahead. You finish your thought.
No, I was going to go off on another tangent. And you take a single word, such as the word mother, for example, which we think of, well, we know what that word means, don't we? We all know what our mother is, but then there's the loving mother, the angry mother, the scolding mother, the withdrawing mother. You can think of all sorts of other emotional contexts to give that single word. It sounds very fixed and solid. It's not.
Or you mother, right? There's that one too.
Yeah, we could go down that path too.
So it almost seems
it's really abusive.
Yeah, it almost seems that our ability to speak, or our ability to get access to language, is deteriorating over time. Looking at the fact that technology is so available, we listen more than we read. We abbreviate all of our words. We're choosing to not properly spell words anymore. People are using words incorrectly, and then making up words that really are not proper English. And so it almost seems that we displace the importance of language to something that's almost secondary, and therefore our experience then becomes less. I mean, what do you think about that?
That's a very complex topic, I think.
I got her stumped. That's the first.
I think well, I say it's not a simple thing to answer. I personally like to use correct grammar, correct spelling. I don't abbreviate because I think it's cleaner and clearer language. It's just a cleaner way of speaking. And I think people are more likely to understand me when I use correct language. And of course, correct language is something that we've been conditioned to learn over a period of time. So to some extent, it's arbitrary, but there are certain linguistic conventions which are considered correct grammar, for example. I know often when someone writes to me and they're abbreviating and they're sloppy in their use of language, it becomes a real communication issue for me because I don't understand what they're trying to say. And I have to go back and ask all kinds of very explicit, detailed questions to figure out what it is they're trying to tell me. That becomes my responsibility, and it's something I can do.
Okay, Dr. Jen,
But I
I'm going to ask you a question. What does
all right,
LMAO stand for?
LMAO, I have the foggiest idea.
Sedona does.
What?
You know what it means, right? Do you know what it means, Sedona?
Yes.
Okay, of course she does.
What does it mean?
She's the younger generation, and that's what's fascinating for me too, because I have the same problem with texting, and I get all these texts, and it's like, oh my gosh, what does this really mean? And I think we're going down this route where we're just chopping up words into just letters and full expressions, and also because it's kind of convenient when there's a new convention of language, if you will, on your phones. But LMAO means laughing my ass off.
Okay.
So it's just kind of interesting how it's almost like we subjugate the meaning of words to something to become much less than what it really is. And it seems that we are become much more disconnected from people because we're not using proper English and we're not using proper grammar. And it's interesting. I find myself too when I'm writing or responding to emails or responding to texts. When I'm in a hurry, in a rush, or I don't care so much, I'll say THX as thanks. But when something really matters to me, and I really want to respond in a respectful way, then I'll capitalize and spell the entire word out or two words out. And so it's interesting how it's tempting just to spend less time focused on the proper way of communication. And I'd like to jump into a little different area now and get more specific about language. And I think it was Krasinski who said the same thing, that the way we communicate is 7% is just words, and then the 55% is our body language, and finally 38% is our intonation. And so it's interesting how when people enter these stores and they're confronted by these salespeople and they're being approached with some sort of sales pitch, and instantly you have this sense of discomfort or disturbance because whatever's coming out of the mouth isn't in alignment with what their body language is, and it's all happening on the very unconscious level. And so when I first learned how we communicate, predominantly through our bodies, the way we stand, our hand motions and everything else, our facial expressions, how much you communicate that way. But ultimately, it's the words that count. And if it's not the words that you speak, it's the words in your own mind. And so talk to us a little bit about, how people can learn to communicate better, whether it's through language, whether it's through body language or intonation, because it's interesting. I do a lot of coaching and I speak to a lot of people, and as a plastic and reconstructive surgeon, I hear a lot of life stories, and particularly when it comes to relationships. And I find it fascinating that most people say, well, we're just not communicating. And they say it with such a blasé, feeling to it, that because they don't understand what they just said. They don't even understand what communication is. And the failure in relationships, and that's, again, kind of what you alluded to, is also what you choose to focus on, what meaning you choose to give something, what emotion, what language you use. And I think that's such an important thing. So help us understand the long-winded question, but help us understand how it is that we can actually communicate better. Because I think that would be tremendously helpful for others to know how to communicate in a way that has the impact that they're hoping to have.
Well, there are all different kinds of conversations you can have. So I think it's really helpful to be clear first about who you're having the conversation with. I have lots of conversations with myself, and they are very uncensored conversations. And often I will actually sit down and just write out whatever is bothering me, whatever I want to get resolved, whatever problem I have, I'll start with that and I'll just write. No censorship whatsoever. Let the words come out any way they want. I can use slang, I can use cuss words, I can call people horrible names. But what's interesting when I do that is that it's never a straight line conversation. It kind of goes around like this, and then it circles back, and it comes out over here with an answer that I never would have figured out had I used just my left brain. But it's with that kind of conversation, it's really important not to censor myself. Now, on the other hand, when I'm talking with someone else, I think lots of times I think I have to listen first to another person's words and get a feel for the language they are speaking. And I'm not talking about Spanish or Chinese or Russian or English, but I'm talking about I'm really talking about the perspective from which they see the world. And there's a lot you can tell by just listening to another person's words, because they will tell you how that person sees the world, or maybe how they have to see the world. And believe me, they know they're right. And their way of seeing the world is the only way to see the world. And it may not be the same as yours. But if I can hear the way they frame their world, then if I choose to maintain the relationship and I want to build the relationship, I can start speaking the language that they speak. I'm just trying to think if I can think of an example of this. Someone who, for example, asks a lot of questions, I might ask a lot of questions right back.
Right.
A very good way often of communicating, if people are willing to listen, is to tell stories. And there are certain forms of language which work better than others generally when you're communicating with another person. I think questions are one, stories are one. Dictatorial, self-righteous, authoritarian language just doesn't work really well. It turns people off. So if your interest is in putting somebody else down, that's the kind of language you will use. If your interest is in communicating with them and building a relationship with them, you won't use that kind of language. So you're coming back here to, what is your intention?
I like that. I think it's, you said two very key things for me is what is your intention? And I think it's helpful for all of us to realize, you want an intention with everything that you do. And I was talking to my daughter today, and she, on her list, she's a little overwhelmed because she's got this huge list of things she has to do. And when it was talk to dad, and I said, well, what if you actually had an outcome that was fun? What if that outcome was had a really beautiful connection with dad and share, what's going on versus just talking with dad? And that totally changed the experience. And you talk very much about experience. And I think that comes with having a very clear outcome with that. And but I'd like to shift the conversation slightly, because next to you on my screen, there's this brilliant girl. She's only 19, absolutely amazing. She's really shooting for the stars, and really excited to have her as my producer here. But what are your thoughts Sedona, about, your experience with language. What is your experience with language, with your peers?
I would say it comes from a lot of different perspectives. From writing is very different than how I talk to people, and I um, make a point to remember that, I think, because sometimes when I'm reading things, they come across so superficially or materialistic, and it's sometimes you can't feel like what the person was really thinking when they wrote it. So I have to like remember that when I'm writing, or if you want it to be less emotional, then you kind of shift the other way.
Right.
But one thing that I find a lot when I'm talking to people is it's funny that you said that, um, what was it? Oh, with the abbreviation. I most of the time have no idea what people are trying to tell me. It's the same thing. People will call me old and they'll call me names and whatever, but it definitely is a point for me and my family in the most proper way that we can, unless we're around each other and there's inside jokes and whatnot, then we kind of leave it alone. But my mom never lets us spell incorrectly on anything. I used to tell her all the time, Mom, there's spell check now.
That's funny. Yeah, it's funny you say that, because when I first came to the United States, I came from England, and I had a very hard time understanding everyone, and they had a hard time understanding me, because I spoke Queen's English, and I was very proud of speaking proper English. And then I was kind of pompous, if you will, in the beginning, because I was at the Mayo Clinic, and I thought, well, hang on a second, these guys should be really smart people, and they should speak proper English, and what are they talking? And so, like, what are they talking, right? And so over time, I was hit with a different problem, and those were my children. And my children were growing up, and they were hanging out around their friends, and they didn't understand me. And so I thought, well, now I need to change the way that I speak. And what's funny and cute at the same time is that now my son, who's 23 years old, is working with one of the most brilliant people in brain strategies and neurolinguistic programming, is now correcting my English. So he's correcting his dad when he speaks. It's absolutely funny, because I always criticized him before, and now to hear my son tell me that I'm speaking incorrectly is amusing. And it's fun at the same time, because it reminds me that we all need to speak in a much better way. And there's this great book called Verbal Advantage that I need to be listening to a lot more. And it really teaches you brilliant words, very expressive words, but also how to pronounce them. But I think a problem that so many people have as well, and that's the other part besides the outcome, is the intention to really, and you mentioned this earlier, Janet, to listen to the other person. And so often what happens is that everybody's so busy, formulating their own answer, that they're not listening to what that other person is actually saying. And so your thoughts on that, Dr. Janet?
Everybody wants to be heard, and not too many of us stop to listen. And it's and I think of do unto others as you would have others do unto you. If you want to be heard, then listen to the other person. And if you listen to the other person, perhaps they will listen to you. Then you can have a real conversation, instead of everyone just slamming each other with a whole barrage of words that nobody is hearing. So there's no connection and there's no alignment. It's just everybody trying to be important.
Yeah.
It's interesting, because a long time ago I heard this, the secret of intelligence, or the perception of intelligence. And the more that you talk, the less that people think that you're intelligent. And so the best thing is just keep your mouth shut, let the other person do all the talking, and you'd be surprised that when you just stand in front of someone and just listen to them and let them talk, that they'll respond to, well, they'll have this perception that you're such a wonderful human being. You're so nice. and you're so intelligent too. But I got the concept of intelligence from the Tao Te Ching Lao Tzu, where those who know do not speak, and those who speak do not know. But it's really more about being careful. Number one, with your intention, with what you say, how you say it, and really, as you're pointing out, being respectful to what it is that somebody else wants to say, and just be patient with that.
I think there's another element here. I find first-person singular language really useful because I can put my truth out there on the table as mine. Nobody has to agree with me, but I can stay in my own truth and integrity. And I'm simply saying, this is the way I see the world right now. I'm not claiming that my view is the truth, but this is the way I see it. And if you see it differently, I really would like to know how you see it, because I could learn something from a different perspective. Then we start having a dynamic, interactive relationship and communication, if that's what we want. Maybe some people don't want that.
And let me add to that too. And sometimes when you're dealing with sales or customer service people, particularly when something went wrong, and rather than yelling at them and screaming at them and making them feel bad, and when it wasn't their fault for whatever happened, let's say your electricity was turned off by mistake, and so I often, or most of the time, or all the time, will start a conversation by owning my own emotion in that moment. It says, look, I'm really frustrated right now. And it not only diffuses it for me, it doesn't give me permission to be mean. However, it puts everything that I'm going to say in context. And I learned that actually from my children. And there was a time that I was going through my separation and divorce, and it was a very, very challenging time. And I didn't think it was fair to place any kind of wrath on my children. And so I would let them know. I says, look, I'm having a really hard time right now. And if I seem impatient, am I yelling at you? Just know what's happening. And that's called ownership. And I think you're absolutely right. We have to own what it is that we're doing, or whatever you want to call it, and realize that whatever it is that we do or say has an impact on another person. And we have to respect that.
And did you just notice that as you spoke there, you were using first-person singular language? This is the way I felt. I'm challenged right now. You allowed yourself to be vulnerable. And yes, you owned your own perspective. So you were in integrity. And you were speaking your truth. And you were going through a rough time. And there's probably a part of you who was saying, please have some understanding and compassion and patience with me, because I'm struggling right now. And when you can speak that vulnerably, people respond.
Yes, absolutely. And it's particularly important actually in high tension environments. And a typical example of a high tension environment is in the hospital, where the critical or emergency situations are happening. And when it's interesting is that not everyone is always as aligned with the situation as they need to be to save a person's life. And that's just the reality. But to make matters worse, and I think a lot of doctors do this, they just yell and scream at the other people. And it's not conducive to the best possible collaboration or cooperation that's available to them, because it's intimidating, it's frightening. And also in the work environment, when somebody's intimidating, you're not going to get the kind of cooperation or involvement as you need to. So owning that personal stress, that anxiety, that tension, or whatever emotion you have, allows, like you said, to be vulnerable, to be witnessed, to be understood, so that whatever's coming out of your mouth makes sense.
In that kind of situation, though, where there is a very specific goal and you need a team working together to save a life, it's really important, I think, lots of times for the person with the most skill in that situation, who would be the doctor, instead of yelling and screaming at everybody, to give very specific directions. I need you to do this now. Go do that. And if you know more than they do, they will follow your instructions, and the whole interaction will be a lot less stressful and more successful because everybody's working together and everybody's doing the best they can. And you keep the blaming, the finger pointing, the screaming out of it. Doesn't mean you may not feel rage if a nurse drops something she shouldn't have dropped or gets a sterile needle dirty or whatever happens in an operating room. But it doesn't solve the problem to scream at her.
No, and you're absolutely right. And again, I think the communication model that is relevant today is it's almost like an iceberg. And so whatever it is that we're communicating is up above the water, but whatever it is that is really there is all underneath the water. And the first part, as you mentioned, to expose that is owning what's really going on with yourself, and then having that space, the freedom to fully express and get the support with that process. And there's a wonderful communication technology established by Harville Hendricks. It's called Imago. I don't know if you're familiar with that. But anybody out there that wants to learn more about communicating with a partner or other people is using the Imago technique, IMAGO. And they have therapists who support that, their workshops for that as well. But it's a beautiful way just to, hold the space, to be witness and to witness, and then to make sure that you understand what it is that the other person is communicating in the way that they are think they're communicating to you or wanting to communicate it to you. And when you have that communication at that level with somebody else, it's almost like a spiritual journey, because in that moment, it's complete understanding, no judgment, it's acceptance, and it's ownership. And what's interesting is that one of the things that they say, if my partner is very upset, and one of the ways to respond to that is, well, I can understand a person in this situation, why they would be upset. So it's giving them the respect that they can have that emotion, but it's not making me or forcing me to accept that that's what I would do myself. But it's, again, completely respecting the other person.
I think it's probably true of most of us, we don't always know what's under that iceberg.
Right.
We don't know what's in our own subconscious. And sometimes we are reacting out of something that may have happened 10, 15 years ago that has nothing to do with what's going on in the current moment, except for the fact that we haven't cleared it. We haven't gone deep down into the depths of the ocean to explore that subconscious area,
Right.
also known as the shadow.
There you go. So I think we have 2 minutes left, right, Sedona? Or is it 3? So why don't you share your thoughts? You have 1 minute to share your thoughts, Sedona.
Oh my gosh, there's so much to say. I think I'd like to actually go back and comment on the kids thing, because the whole time that we were talking for the last couple minutes, I was really thinking about that, and I think that it kind of goes along with the golden rule that what you do unto others, you should want the same respect and treatment for yourself. I think what I learned, I was a dance teacher for many years. Sounds silly because I'm 19, but that's true. And I learned that can be they really do soak up everything. They see everything. You can see in their conversations kind of the people that they've been taught to be and what they learn at home and who they can become, and you kind of see their potential there. And one thing that I learned can also be great sounding boards. If you just talk to them for 5 minutes, they can give you all the wisdom in the world. Honestly, perfect country would be run by 5-year-olds. All of them just know so much. And it's crazy, but it's true. There's so many kids that understand why you need to love people and why you need to be nice to people, and that it never even crosses their mind. And I think that a lot of times what I think about when I do things is what happens. Will I still think this way in 10, 15 years when my kids start growing up and then doing the same things? Is that something that, and I sometimes, if I go through something like really challenging, I'll write down what I was feeling at the time, so that I remember what that's like when they go through it.
Right. So I think our time's up, and I apologize for a little bit of that echo there, but I'm Dr. Bart Rademacher, Prescription for Your Transformation, Real People, Real Conversations, Real Success, talking to Dr. Janet Smith Warfield. And take it away, Sedona.